He looked me dead in the eye and said it like a fact, not an insult. You can't survive without me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch. I just stood there, watching him sip his whiskey, his shirt half-buttoned from his long day at work, while Chloe's lipstick dried on his collar. Maybe once, that sentence would have broken me. It nearly had for years. But tonight it rang hollow. I'd already packed my bag. One duffel. No ceremony. No goodbye kiss. Just a woman who finally saw the man she once believed in for who he really was. Then I guess I'll die trying, I whispered, and I walked out. No plan. No money. Just a phone full of unpaid invoices, a heart full of betrayal, and the taste of my own power finally rising on my tongue. He thought I was walking away from him. But I was walking toward the woman I was supposed to become. And someday he'd understand, when I owned everything he ever built. So, if you've ever been told you're nothing without them, stay with me. This story is yours too. 2 years ago, I had a job offer at a Fortune 500 company in New York. A 6-figure salary, corner office, mentorship under a woman I admired. But I turned it down for him. He had a vision, he said. A tech startup that would change the industry. I believed in him more than I believed in myself. So I moved to Chicago, rented a cheaper apartment, and spent my savings funding his dream. He said we were a team. I cooked dinners in our cramped kitchen while he worked late. I built pitch decks while he practiced in the mirror. I took freelance gigs on the side to cover rent when his startup bank account dipped below zero. I gave everything I had, time, energy, love. He promised me equity. Said when the company took off, we'd get married. He joked I'd be the CFO, then said, "No, CEO. You're smarter than me." I used to blush when he said that. Looking back, I think he only said it to keep me around. To keep using what I brought to the table while making sure I never sat at it. The lies didn't arrive all at once. They trickled in, like cold air, through a cracked window. It started with meetings that ran too long, texts he answered in the bathroom, perfume I didn't wear clinging to our car. And then Chloe. Fresh out of business school, unervingly pretty, and hired as his executive assistant, even though the company had 3 employees. He told me not to be insecure. Said Chloe was just eager and ambitious. She reminds me of you, he'd said once, and I still don't know if he meant it as a compliment or a confession. Dinners turned into takeout containers I ate alone. He stopped saying we. It was his company now. His vision. I was told to trust the process and stop overthinking. But I wasn't overthinking. I was being erased. Bit by bit. And I let him. Because I still believed he loved me. I still believed that if I held on just a little longer, he'd remember how much of his dream had my fingerprints all over it. It was late on a Thursday, when everything shattered. He'd said he had an investor dinner and would be home by midnight. I'd made mushroom risotto, his favorite, and waited. Midnight came and went. I called once, then again. No answer. Something in me snapped. I grabbed my coat and took a cab to the office. The lights were still on. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I saw them, him and Chloe. Wine glasses. Candles. Her heels off. His tie loosened. It didn't look like business. It looked like intimacy. Like something once sacred now repackaged for someone new. I stood there, watching for longer than I should have. My body frozen, my mind racing. When I finally walked in, he didn't even look shocked. Just annoyed. "You're being dramatic," he said, wiping his mouth. Chloe didn't even flinch. Like she knew I was already gone. And maybe she was right. Because in that moment, something inside me began to burn. Quietly. Powerfully. Like a woman who'd finally seen the truth and wouldn't unsee it again. He followed me outside, not to apologize, but to lecture me. "You've let yourself go," he said, as if my exhaustion was a personal attack on him. "You don't understand how much pressure I'm under." And then, with no hesitation, "You're paranoid. There's nothing going on." Asked him if Chloe knew he proposed to me last Christmas. He scoffed. "It's not a real engagement if you're not even contributing anymore." I laughed, bitter and broken. I'd contributed everything. My savings, my time, my soul. He'd taken it all and called it support. Now that his startup had investors and press coverage, I was suddenly baggage. Too soft. Too emotional. "This is why I didn't give you shares," he muttered under his breath, forgetting I'd begged him for a contract for months. "We're not married yet. It's complicated."
No.
It wasn't. He'd made sure I had nothing to walk away with, because he always planned to walk away first. And in that moment, I realized he never feared losing me. He counted on it. I packed while he slept. Not in our bed, but in his office, apparently. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. I left the ring on the nightstand. Took my charger, a single suitcase, and a folder filled with the earliest sketches of his company. The logo I designed, the business plan I helped refine, the branding deck I'd built from scratch.
Mine.
All of it.
He just didn't see it.
He thought I was just the helper. The girl behind the curtain. I texted a friend from college who lived across town. She didn't ask questions. "Come over. Stay as long as you need." I slept on her couch for 3 days. Didn't shower. Barely ate. Just replayed it all in my head. Over and over. Every red flag I ignored. Every time I laughed off his arrogance. I hated myself for letting him use me. But on day 4, I opened my laptop. Found a local business accelerator. And applied. Not with his company. Not with his name. With mine. The application asked for a one-line pitch. I typed, "A human-centered solution to productivity burnout, built by the woman who survived it." It wasn't catchy, but it was honest. I attached mock-ups I'd made months ago, back when I thought I was helping our company. But the idea had always been mine. The interface. The user flow. He didn't even understand how it worked. I did. And now I would build it. My way. With my voice. I cleaned myself up, put on the one blazer I still owned, and went to the interview. I was shaking. Not because I was afraid, but because I was done waiting for someone else to believe in me. I walked out of that room with a slot in the accelerator and a $5,000 grant. It wasn't much, but it was more than I ever had with him because it was mine. Fully legally mine. And this time, I wasn't going to give it away for a promise and a kiss. As I began to build, I started remembering all the ideas he once borrowed. The UX design I sketched on napkins. The pricing model I developed in a spreadsheet he never opened. Even the tagline, he used my words on national TV and never gave me credit. I wasn't bitter. I was focused. Every piece of what I was building now came from what I'd once been too generous with. I stayed up late, coded with shaky hands, watched YouTube tutorials on APIs and integrations, and cried through it all. Not from sadness, but from clarity. The vision I once gave him for free, I was now using to build my own foundation. Quietly. Fiercely. I didn't post on social media. I didn't announce anything. I let the silence grow, and filled it with work. And within 6 months, I had a prototype. Users. Feedback. A new name for the product. A new name for me. The launch was soft. A few blogs. A tweet thread that went viral. Suddenly, I was flooded with interest. Startups wanted demos. Investors requested calls. One night, I opened TechCrunch, and there it was. Former co-founder launches riveting anti-burnout platform. They didn't mention him.
Just me.
My name. My story. I read that article 10 times. Not out of pride, but disbelief. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was real. Credible. Fundable. And for the first time, I saw myself the way he never did. As a force. It didn't take long for the news to reach him. I heard from a mutual friend that he threw a glass at the wall. "How did she pull this off?" he'd asked.
Easy.
I stopped waiting for his permission. I stopped asking to be seen. I built something while he played office politics with his assistant-turned-partner. And now the world was starting to notice. So was he. His company began to unravel slowly. At first, it was small things, delayed product releases, investors asking hard questions, user reviews dropping. Then people started mentioning me in meetings. "Have you seen her platform? It's more intuitive. They say she's building something that actually listens to users." He hated it. Hated that my name was now being spoken in rooms he once tried to lock me out of. Chloe, now his COO, couldn't keep up. She had titles, but no talent. Vision without execution. And while they scrambled to patch holes, my team grew. From 3 freelancers to a full-time staff. From rented co-working desks to our own floor in a downtown building. I didn't rush it. I didn't gloat. I just worked. And the contrast between us grew louder. They were trying to preserve a house of cards. I was building a fortress. And soon, someone suggested the unthinkable. I should acquire them. I didn't react at first. The idea of buying out the man who once told me I was worthless sounded poetic, but I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. Still, I kept watching the numbers. His company's valuation was plummeting. Investors were jumping ship. Internal reports leaked, missed targets, high turnover, and product bugs everywhere. I hired a firm to look into it quietly. And there it was, an opening. They were desperate for capital. And desperate people accept offers they normally wouldn't entertain. My lawyer drafted a letter of intent. I offered half of what the company had once been worth, just enough to clear their debts. I didn't expect him to accept, but he did. Too quickly. That's when I realized he had no idea who was behind the deal. No clue the woman he used, dismissed, and discarded was now the one holding the pen. I asked my attorney to schedule a meeting in person. Because some moments demand eye contact. I wasn't going to raise my voice. I wasn't going to gloat. I was just going to let him watch me sign the dotted line, wearing the same shade of lipstick Chloe once left on his collar. The boardroom hadn't changed. Still cold, gray, masculine. The walls lined with framed patents that were mostly mine in spirit if not in name. He walked in 5 minutes late, hair slicked back, suit wrinkled. He looked thinner. Tired. Maybe the stress was finally catching up. When he saw me sitting at the head of the table, he froze. Completely. Like his mind needed extra seconds to process what his eyes already knew. You, he asked. Just one word. One syllable packed with disbelief, fear, and something that almost sounded like hope. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My signature was already on the papers. Chloe came in after him, barking questions at the assistant, demanding to know what was going on. You sold to her, she shrieked. You didn't think to ask who the buyer was? He sat down slowly, the color draining from his face. This is a mistake, he said. You can't run this. I smiled, genuinely. You once said I couldn't survive without you. Let's see how you survive with me. He tried to bargain. Tried to rewrite the past in that same soft voice he used when I used to catch him lying. You helped build this, he said. This could be our second chance. Chloe looked horrified. Are you seriously trying to get her back? She snapped. You said she was weak. He flinched. I didn't. I'm not here to rekindle anything, I said calmly. This is business, not sentiment. I slid the termination paperwork across the table toward Chloe. Your services are no longer required. She laughed, bitterly. You can't fire me. I have an executive contract. I leaned forward, which expired last month and was never renewed. You missed the renewal clause while trying to imitate leadership. Her face flushed red. She stood, hissed something under her breath, and stormed out. He remained seated. What about me? He asked, voice small. What happens to me? I looked at him and said, You can stay for now. Maybe as a consultant. Maybe just for morale. But don't get comfortable. I'm only offering you what you once offered me. Nothing guaranteed. He signed the transition documents with trembling hands. The same hands that used to cradle my face, now gripping a cheap pen like it was his last anchor. I didn't offer a handshake. I didn't thank him. I just collected the papers, stood up, and left the room. The office was mine now. I walked the halls, noting the peeling paint, the lifeless atmosphere, the drained faces of employees who looked like survivors of something they couldn't name. I gathered the leadership team that afternoon. No grand speeches. Just one sentence. Things are going to change. I started with transparency, company-wide meetings every Friday. Performance incentives based on creativity, not politics. An anonymous suggestion portal. I rehired 3 brilliant women Chloe had pushed out. I repainted the walls, opened the blinds, and replaced the outdated furniture with light, collaborative spaces. The logo outside came down. A new one went up, fresh, bold, and mine. I didn't rename the company after myself. That would have been easy. I named it after the code name I used during the accelerator. The one I whispered to myself on the nights I cried. Phoenix. People noticed. Not just internally, but across the industry. Clients returned. Former partners sent congratulatory emails. Journalists started calling the acquisition a quiet masterstroke. I didn't entertain interviews yet. I wanted results to speak before I did. Revenue doubled in 6 months. Then tripled. My old inbox filled with messages from people who once ghosted me, investors who chose him, ex-colleagues who dismissed me, even professors who once said I lacked founder energy. Now they wanted meetings, collaborations.
Coffee.
I smiled, replied politely, and focused on my team. My real team. The one that showed up, believed, and built with me from the ground up. Meanwhile, he still sat in the office next to the pantry, barely noticed. A glorified paperweight. I let him keep his mug. The one that said, "World's Best CEO." It felt poetic, especially as interns walked past it, whispering to each other about who he used to be. One afternoon, I caught him staring at my name on the lobby wall. He didn't say anything, but his eyes said it all. She really did it. He called me late one night. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. He sounded drunk. Or maybe just lost. "I still love you," he said, like it meant something. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." I didn't reply. Just silence. It stretched long enough for him to realize I wasn't going to rescue him from it. "You don't hate me?" he asked finally. I sighed.
No.
"But I don't love you either. And that's harder to live with, isn't it?" I hung up before he could respond. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't anything. I was busy. Leading board meetings. Writing product roadmaps. Mentoring women who reminded me of who I used to be. I didn't have time to carry his shame or hold space for his regret. I left the phone face down on my nightstand and returned to the book I'd been reading. The chapter was about reclaiming your narrative, and I smiled because mine had never been clearer. Chloe, however, wasn't done. A few weeks later, a scandal hit the tech blogs. Sources close to Phoenix's founder say she sabotaged her ex's company from the inside. I expected it. I'd seen her type before, clinging to power through chaos. But I was ready. My legal team responded within an hour. We released internal documents, timestamps, audit logs.
Clean.
Professional. Absolute. The story collapsed before it could breathe. And in its place, a new headline emerged. Phoenix founder handles scandal with unshakable grace. My inbox exploded. So did our user base. Chloe had accidentally given me the best PR of the year. Meanwhile, she blocked me on everything. I heard she tried launching her own company. It failed in 2 months. Turns out, it's hard to build something when all you've ever done is tear other people down. She blamed me, of course. But I didn't care. I wasn't in competition with her. Or him. I was in competition with the woman I used to be, the one who thought she needed anyone to survive. Former employees began returning. Some knocked on my office door with nervous eyes and resumes. Others just showed up to say thank you for creating a space where they could finally breathe. One guy, Jordan, stood in the hallway with tears in his eyes. "I watched what they did to you," he whispered. I didn't say anything. "I'm sorry." I nodded. No revenge. No lecture. Just progress. I rehired the ones who fit. The rest I referred elsewhere. I didn't need to punish anyone. Success was already doing that for me. My team had grown from survivors into visionaries. We laughed at meetings. Debated with fire and joy. Shared credit. Celebrated small wins like they were IPOs. We were becoming the kind of company I once dreamed of. A place where people didn't have to shrink themselves to be seen. And every day, I walked past the old conference room where I once caught them with the wine glasses and candles. But now, that room was filled with light. Real light. And purpose. I was invited to speak at a tech summit just 8 months after the acquisition. The same summit where he'd once introduced Chloe as the future of innovation. I stood backstage, watching the audience fill with venture capitalists, founders, and executives, many of whom had once ignored my emails or taken meetings with him instead. Now I was the keynote. As I walked on stage, I saw him. Back row. No name badge. Just him and his regret. I didn't pause. I spoke clearly, confidently. I told the story of rebuilding from ashes, without bitterness, just facts. I didn't mention names, but the room felt it. Afterward, people lined up to shake my hand. One woman said, "Your story gave me the courage to leave my toxic co-founder." I smiled and meant it. I was no longer speaking for revenge. I was speaking for every woman told she was too emotional, too inexperienced, too dependent. That night, I left the summit with a standing ovation and 5 new investor meetings. He left without anyone noticing, just like I once did. The next time he called, I didn't answer. He left a voicemail instead. His voice was low, broken, with that same old desperation I once mistook for love. "I miss you. I still believe we could have built something great together." He said he was lost without me, that Chloe was gone, the company didn't feel the same, and he couldn't sleep at night. I listened once, then deleted it, because I knew now. He didn't miss me. He missed what I did for him, what I made easy, what I absorbed, protected, polished. He didn't want a partner, he wanted a foundation. And now that he'd crumbled, he remembered the cement he once kicked aside. I didn't hate him. I pitied him. Because while he thought success was power, I had learned that real power was rebuilding your life with no one's name attached to it but your own. And I wasn't going back, not even to say goodbye. A year to the day I walked out, I hosted a celebration for the team. We called it Phoenix Day. We rented a rooftop 2 blocks from the old apartment I used to cry in. There were lights, laughter, speeches, and dancing. I wore a red suit, the exact shade of lipstick I wore to the acquisition meeting. It felt like armor and freedom stitched into one. As the night hit its peak, I stepped aside for air and looked out over the city's skyline. That's when I saw him, across the street, just standing there on the sidewalk, holding flowers like he belonged, like he was part of this moment. Someone must have told him about the party. Maybe he still had a friend on the payroll. For a second, our eyes met, just like in the boardroom. But this time, I didn't walk toward him. I turned, walked back inside, and raised a toast to my team, letting him watch from the outside, the place he'd always assumed I'd be. He tried to approach me later that night. Security stopped him at the lobby, but I saw it from the balcony. He was holding the bouquet out like a peace offering. I almost laughed. After everything, he still thought he could hand me flowers and I'd forget the ashes. The guard asked if I wanted to let him up. I shook my head once. No emotion, just finality. The same kind he gave me when he whispered to Chloe in that office while I stood outside with a broken heart. A few guests noticed him, whispered, "Isn't that?" But I never confirmed anything. I didn't need to. The narrative had changed. I was no longer the girl who was left. I was the woman who rose. And everyone knew it. He stood outside for 20 minutes before leaving. The flowers drooped by the time he disappeared into the night. They reminded me of him. Pretty on the surface. But without roots, they never had a chance to last. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at my apartment. No return address. Just 6 words, handwritten on a plain card. "You didn't need me." I know. I read it once. Then again. And for a moment, something in me stirred. Grief, maybe. Not for him. For who I used to be. For the girl who would have cried reading those words, clung to them like a lifeline, and maybe even called him back. But not this time. I folded the card neatly and tucked it in the drawer with my earliest pitch notes, the ones I wrote during the worst week of my life. I wasn't keeping it for sentiment. I was keeping it as proof that once upon a time, I was told I couldn't survive. And now I owned everything they built on the belief I wouldn't. Not every love story is meant to be healed. Some are meant to be the fire that forges something better. I didn't respond to the letter. Not because I was cold, but because closure isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's the silence that speaks loudest. I went back to work, back to dreaming forward. We were preparing for our next funding round. Our growth had stunned analysts, and one of Silicon Valley's top VCs requested a private dinner. I showed up in a navy silk dress and sneakers, because power doesn't always wear heels. We talked numbers, product vision, and culture. At the end, the investor smiled and said, "I've never seen a founder own a room like you do. What's your secret?" I didn't give a long answer. Just said, "Being underestimated is a powerful motivator." He laughed and signed the check. $10 million. Series B, closed. When I got back to my apartment, I opened a bottle of wine, alone, happily, and sat on the floor where I once cried. Same floor. Same woman. Different soul. I raised the glass to the air and whispered, "Thank you for breaking me." Because if he hadn't, I might never have found out how unbreakable I really was. My face started showing up in places I never imagined. Business magazines.
Podcasts.
Conference posters. A headline called me the woman who beat the boys at their own game. I didn't like the framing, but I understood it. The world still saw my success as revenge. I saw it as resurrection. I wasn't chasing him anymore. I was chasing impact. My platform was being used by thousands of teams across the world, helping real people manage burnout, realign with purpose, and reclaim time. I got thank you emails from single moms, junior developers, even a nurse who said our app stopped her from quitting healthcare. That one made me cry. I remembered how small I once felt, how invisible. And now here I was, building something that gave people back their power. I didn't feel like a founder. I felt like a witness to something divine. Something honest. This wasn't just a business. It was a message. You don't have to stay small for someone else to shine. Every once in a while, I'd get updates about him. I never asked, but people love gossip. They said he moved to a smaller place, that he was consulting here and there, but nothing stuck. Chloe was completely out of the picture. Rumor had it she left town. He tried pitching a new startup, but no one bit. Investors remembered the fallout. Employees remembered the toxicity. He didn't understand how to rebuild because he'd never actually built anything himself. Not really. He'd assembled people, stolen ideas, projected confidence. But real creation takes humility.
Grit.
Consistency. I wasn't proud of his failure, but I wasn't sorry for it either. You reap what you plant. And when you spend years sowing arrogance, it's hard to grow roots in scorched earth. Meanwhile, I was planting every day, investing in new leaders, sponsoring scholarships, launching a fellowship for women in tech. I wasn't just building a company anymore. I was building a legacy, something he could never take credit for, something that would outlast both of our names. One day, I walked into a meeting and found my youngest intern, Maya, waiting with wide eyes. "I read your story," she blurted. "The old one. The beginning. You were him?" It took me a second to realize what she meant. She thought I was the one who had betrayed someone. I smiled gently and said, "No. I was the girl who believed him." She looked stunned. "But you seem so powerful." I nodded. Power grows in the dark. When you think you have none left. That conversation stayed with me for weeks. It reminded me how far I'd come. How easy it was for people to see your present and forget your past. They see the suit, the office, the titles, but not the nights on a couch, the shame, the silence. So I started telling the full story more. Not to glorify the pain, but to show that beginnings can be brutal and beautiful at the same time, especially when you're brave enough to keep going. I was offered a book deal, a memoir. I almost said no, but then I thought of Maya. And all the women like her, sitting in silence, wondering if they were crazy for feeling used, for wanting more. I said yes. I wrote every word myself. No ghostwriter. I called it Unseen, the cost of believing in the wrong person. The day it hit shelves, it sold out in under 3 hours.
Reviews poured in.
One critic called it a mirror for every silenced woman in tech. I didn't care about sales. I cared that someone somewhere, would pick it up at their breaking point and find themselves in my pages. That maybe it would stop someone from walking into the same fire I did, or give them the courage to walk out. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a voice. And that voice was louder than his, than Chloe's, than the system that once tried to swallow me whole. I'd written myself into existence. Fully. Finally. Then came the call I never expected. A nonprofit that specialized in mentoring girls in STEM invited me to serve as their board chair. They'd read my book, watched my interviews. They said I was the kind of leader they wanted those girls to look up to, not for perfection but for resilience. I accepted without hesitation. On my first visit, I met a group of 12-year-olds building apps with more imagination than I'd ever seen in a venture room. One girl, Layla, pulled me aside and whispered, "I want to be like you one day." I knelt down and said, "Be better than me. Start sooner. Trust yourself faster." That day changed something in me. It made me realize that success isn't measured in exits or articles. It's measured in how many people rise after you. I left the building that afternoon with tears in my eyes and a new fire in my heart. I wasn't just a founder. I was a spark. And I was going to spend the rest of my life setting futures on fire, in the best way. The impact of the nonprofit work bled into my company's DNA. We launched a mentorship track inside Phoenix, pairing junior hires with seasoned developers, rotational programs for high school girls. Chloe once said mentorship was a waste of time and not scalable. I disagreed. So did the results. Our retention rate hit 98%. Employees stayed, not for money, but for meaning. They knew this was a place where their voices mattered, where their growth mattered. Every Friday, we held a team town hall. I'd open with the same line every week. "What did you learn that surprised you?" It became a tradition. And somewhere along the way, Phoenix stopped being my company. It became our movement. I wasn't just building software. I was rewriting culture.
And people noticed.
Other companies started copying our practices. Imitation didn't bother me. It was proof we were ahead. One investor called it the Phoenix model. I smiled when I heard that, because in the ashes of what he left me with, I didn't just rebuild, I redefined. I turned a breakup into a blueprint. And I was just getting started. The irony was this: the more powerful I became, the more invisible he became. In meetings, when people referenced the original company he'd founded, they didn't even use his name. Just mine. When she turned it around, when she took over, I once overheard a junior exec say, "I think she started it all, actually." I didn't correct them, because in many ways I had. The vision, the tone, the heart, it was always mine. He just wore it like a borrowed suit. And now that it no longer fit, no one remembered him at all. He tried reappearing online. LinkedIn rants about toxic feminism. A Medium blog about how women were taking over the industry with victim narratives. It barely got traction. The comments tore him apart. "You mean the founder of Phoenix?" someone replied. "She's doing just fine without you." He deleted the post. I heard he applied for jobs and kept getting passed over. One company even emailed me as a reference. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. His resume spoke, and it told the truth he never could. He showed up one final time, at a bookstore event where I was doing a signing. He stood at the back of the line, holding a copy of my memoir. When it was his turn, he placed the book down and looked at me with empty eyes. "Will you sign it?" he asked. My team watched, unsure. I nodded, took a pen, opened the front cover, and wrote 5 words. "You taught me what not." No name, no warmth.
Just that.
I slid it back across the table. He took it and walked away. That was the last time I saw him. Not because I banished him, but because life finally caught up to him.
It was poetic in a way.
He tried to erase me once. Now, the only version of him that still existed was the one written in my story. His power, his cruelty, his downfall, all trapped in a chapter 1 had already closed. The world had moved on.
So had I.
And he was now just a footnote in a book that bore only my name on the spine. I was invited to ring the opening bell at the stock exchange when Phoenix went public. I wore the same heels he once said were too ambitious. My mother flew in from out of state. My mentor from New York sent flowers and a note that said, "Told you you'd outgrow him." We took the stage as a team.
Diverse.
Balanced. Joyful. When the bell rang, confetti filled the air and cameras clicked, but all I heard was silence. The good kind. The kind that lives deep in your chest when you realize you've done it. You really did it. Not in spite of him, but because at some point he stopped being the center of the story. And I started being the author. My CFO leaned over and whispered, "What would he say if he could see you now?" I smiled. He'd say I got lucky. And maybe I did. Lucky enough to lose him early. Lucky enough to be underestimated. Lucky enough to find out how limitless I could be when I finally let go of needing someone who couldn't even see me. Months later, a journalist asked me, "What would you say to the version of yourself from 3 years ago?" I paused for a long time before answering. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to say it right. Finally, I said, "I'd tell her she's not crazy. That her love wasn't wasted. It just had the wrong recipient. And I'd tell her to stop waiting. No one's coming. But she doesn't need them. She has herself. And that's more than enough." The interviewer got quiet. I think she cried. We all do, sometimes, when we realize we're stronger than we were told to be. After the article came out, my inbox filled again, not with congratulations, but confessions. From women, men, non-binary founders. All saying the same thing. Your story gave me the push I needed. That's when I knew. The pain was never just for me. It was a bridge. One I had crossed alone so others wouldn't have to. And I would never apologize for how I survived. One afternoon, while cleaning out my old desk at home, I found the ring. The one he gave me on Christmas Eve when he swore forever. I had kept it, not out of sentiment, but because it reminded me of a question I used to ask. What if he comes back? Now, holding it again, I felt nothing. Not sorrow. Not rage. Just closure. I took it outside, walked to the nearest river, and tossed it into the current. No speech. No drama. Just a quiet goodbye to a version of me who once thought love had to hurt to be real. As I watched it sink, I felt a strange kind of joy. Not because I had won, but because I had healed. And healing, I'd learned, is the most rebellious act of all. Especially for women who were once told their worth depended on staying.
I didn't stay. I soared.
And now, every morning, I wake up with no one's name in my mouth but my own. I sometimes get asked if I ever loved him, and I always answer honestly, I did.
Deeply.
Enough to sacrifice dreams, uproot my life, and hand over pieces of myself I hadn't even named yet. But what I've come to understand is that love doesn't always mean forever. Sometimes love is a stepping stone, a catalyst, a mirror. He showed me everything I never want again. And in the process, he helped me discover everything I am. Would I choose him again if I had to relive it? Maybe. Not because he deserved my love, but because without the fire, I wouldn't have forged the steel. Without the heartbreak, I might still be sleeping on my potential. We don't always get to pick the people who wake us up. Sometimes, they come wearing the disguise of forever. But when the mask falls and you're standing in the ruins, you get to decide what grows next. I chose to plant something unshakable. Something that bloomed only when I stopped asking for validation. Something he could never touch, steal, or sabotage. My life. One of the proudest days of my life came not from a funding round or a feature story, but a quiet moment in my office. Maya knocked gently, stepped in, and said, "I got into MIT." Her voice cracked. My heart swelled. We hugged. She'd joined Phoenix as an intern 2 years earlier. Eager, shy, full of wonder. Now she was soaring. That's what legacy looks like. Not plaques or interviews, but people you pour into. People who go further than you ever did. She called me her mentor. I called her my reminder that everything I built, every tear, every betrayal, every lonely night, was worth it. Because it created a path. One she could walk without ever having to shrink. That day, after she left, I looked around the office. My team laughed in the next room. Someone was playing music. Sunlight poured through the windows I once couldn't afford. It didn't feel like a company. It felt like a home. And I realized I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. Fully.
Fiercely.
Finally. He tried to sue me once. A year after the book. Claimed I defamed him. That I used confidential materials. The case didn't last long. My lawyers came prepared, as always. We filed a countersuit. He withdrew quietly. But I saw the desperation in it. A man drowning, reaching for anything to pull under with him. I didn't hate him for it. I just refused to engage. I wouldn't fight someone already losing to himself. The world didn't need another feud. It needed more builders. And I had building to do. So while he fumbled in the dark, I was at a round table in Geneva consulting governments on female leadership in tech. While he typed angry comments online, I was launching a fund to support underrepresented founders. I never mentioned him again. Because he wasn't my villain anymore. He was just a closed door I once knocked on. Now I was walking through gates he'd never even seen. And I was holding them open for others behind me. I once feared being alone. I thought silence meant failure. That if no one was clapping, maybe I wasn't doing it right. Now, silence is my sanctuary. I take solo retreats, no phone, no press, no expectations. Just me, the trees, and the truth. In one cabin, I wrote a note to my younger self and buried it under a pine tree. It said, "You were always enough, even when they didn't see it." I cried while writing it, not from pain, from release. There's something sacred about healing in places no one applauds. It reminded me that everything I've done, every acquisition, every accolade, started from a quiet moment of choosing myself. Not out of pride, out of necessity. Women aren't told enough that we can be whole alone, that we can be powerful in stillness. But I've tasted that solitude now, and I crave it, not to hide but to remember. That even before Phoenix, before the book, before the headlines, I was someone. And I will remain someone, even if the lights go out tomorrow. I bought my old apartment building last fall. The one I cried in. The one I left at midnight, suitcase in hand, heart in pieces. I walked through it room by room. The chipped tiles. The dent in the hallway from when I slammed the door that night. Everything was still there. Except me. I had outgrown it. Transcended it. I turned the building into affordable housing for women starting over, post-divorce, post-job loss, post-breakdown.
We named it the Nest.
A place to land when you've been pushed from your branches too soon. Every time I visit, I leave a fresh bouquet of sunflowers in the lobby. No plaque.
No speech.
Just beauty. Just a signal that rebirth lives here. That power lives here. And that what breaks you today could be the very soil you grow in tomorrow. I walk out smiling every time, because that apartment once held my rock bottom. And now it holds women rising. Quietly, boldly, just like I once did. Not long ago, I walked past my old office building, the one he first rented, where I used to leave handwritten notes on his desk, where Chloe laughed too loudly, where I was once humiliated and erased. It had a new tenant now. Some crypto firm. Glass walls. Neon signage. I stood outside for a moment, watching strangers walk in, and out of what used to be the setting of my worst memories. I felt nothing. No sting. No rage. Just gratitude. Because the woman who stood outside that door now wasn't the one who used to walk in. She wasn't waiting to be seen.
She was the view.
And she didn't need anyone's permission to stand tall. I snapped a photo, not to remember the pain, but to remind myself, every ending comes with a door you don't expect. I turned around, got in my car, and drove off. Not toward a new beginning, but from a life I had built, earned, owned.
Completely.
I started receiving letters from women around the world. Not emails, letters. Handwritten. Folded with care. Sent from villages, cities, prison cells, college dorms. Some told me they'd walked away from toxic marriages after reading my story. Others said they'd finally pitched that business, enrolled in that course, stopped apologizing for taking up space. One woman wrote, I stopped shrinking. I started breathing. I kept every letter in a wooden box beside my desk. On bad days, I'd open it and remind myself, it wasn't just a company I built, it was a movement. A message sent out like a flare to anyone sitting in the dark, wondering if it was safe to want more. I'd been that woman once.
Bent. Silent.
Loyal to someone who saw me as replaceable. And now, those same hands that once trembled when opening breakup texts were opening letters of hope. If that isn't transformation, I don't know what is. I wasn't healed in spite of the fire. I was forged in it. And every woman who writes to me is proof. We don't just rise. We rebuild the world beneath our feet. There are still moments when I feel her, the old me. The one who waited for texts that never came. Who twisted herself to fit into rooms built by men with no intention of letting her lead. I feel her sometimes in the quiet. She tugs at my sleeve when I second-guess myself. But I don't push her away. I honor her. I let her sit beside me and I whisper, look how far we've come. Because I couldn't be who I am without who I was. That girl loved deeply, trusted quickly, gave everything. She deserved better, yes, but she also gave me the blueprint, the heart, the fire. I protect her now, with every decision I make, with every boundary I set, with every time I say no to something that feels small. She isn't my weakness, she's my root. And I will never again treat her like something to hide. She survived long enough for me to thrive. That makes her sacred. When Forbes asked to do a cover story, I almost declined. I didn't care about the spotlight anymore. But then I thought, why not show the world what happens when a woman reclaims her narrative entirely? So I agreed. The day of the shoot, I wore a tailored black suit and no jewelry. Just bold red lipstick, the same shade from the day I signed his company. We shot on the rooftop of Phoenix HQ. Wind in my hair. Chin high. The photographer whispered, power looks good on you. I smiled, but inside I thought, no, freedom does. When the cover dropped, the headline read, she wasn't supposed to survive. She didn't just survive, she took over. People shared it everywhere. But what meant the most was the text from Maya. One day, that'll be me. That's when I knew I hadn't just lived through my story. I'd passed the torch, lit new flames, and there would be no going back. Not for me, not for any of us. He never reached out again. Maybe he finally understood that some things are beyond repair. Or maybe he was just too ashamed to face what he lost. I didn't need an apology anymore. The absence of his voice became its own closure. Life has a way of silencing those who once shouted over you. And now I moved through my days with a quiet kind of victory. The kind that doesn't need to be announced. I still kept the note he wrote. The one that said, you didn't need me. I know. Not as proof of his regret, but of my growth. I look at it now and think, you were right. I didn't need you.
But you needed me.
And that was your downfall. He mistook kindness for weakness, loyalty for dependency. And when I left, he didn't just lose a partner. He lost the entire foundation. Some people never realize the strength of what they had until it rises without them. And by then, it's too late. There's a photo framed in my office, one no one ever notices unless I point it out. It's from my first pitch at the accelerator. My eyes are tired. My blazer's too big. But there's a spark in me, faint, but there. A woman on the edge of becoming. I keep it there to remind myself where it all began. Before the money. Before the acquisition. Before the empire. Just a girl with shaky hands and stubborn hope. When I sit at my desk now, I sometimes glance at it and whisper, we did it. And I mean we. Because that version of me didn't quit when everything inside her screamed to. She didn't crumble when he walked out. She didn't snap when they called her crazy. She stayed. She built. She kept going. And because of her, I get to sit here now, unapologetic, unbothered, unstoppable. She was the beginning. And I will carry her with me into every future I create. I no longer walk into rooms trying to prove anything. I don't over-explain. Don't second-guess. I show up fully. Soft when I want to be. Sharp when I need to be. I've learned that real power isn't about control. It's about choice. I chose to leave. I chose to rebuild. I chose to lead with integrity, not ego. That's the difference between him and me. He built to be seen. I built so others could see themselves. He chased applause. I chased alignment. And in the end, I won something far greater than revenge. I won peace. Not just the absence of chaos, but the presence of purpose. That quiet, humming truth that says, you are exactly where you were meant to be. I don't check his socials. I don't wonder what could have been. Because I know now, if I had stayed, I would have shrunk. I would have dimmed. I would have missed this entire life. And that would have been the real tragedy. Not losing him, but losing myself. Sometimes, I get asked what I'd say if I saw him again. If he sat across from me in a cafe, coffee in hand, asking for one last conversation. I've thought about it. And the truth is, I'd smile. Not out of forgiveness, but because I've finally reclaimed every part of the story he once tried to write over. I'd thank him for showing me how small a person can think, how fragile ego can be. And then I'd leave the cafe before he could say a word. Not because I'm cruel, but because I don't owe him my present. He already took enough of my past. My life is no longer a cautionary tale. It's a blueprint for every woman who was once told she couldn't survive without someone else. Let this be your proof.
Not only can you survive,
You can rise. You can reign. And one day, you'll stand tall in the ruins of what tried to break you and whisper the sweetest truth of all. I never needed you. But you
oh, you needed me.